Hey, everybody. Welcome to Love and Relo, the voice of the relocation industry. I am your host, Ben Cross, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host, the owner of the Christmas tree, Ben Sookia. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Ben. How are you?
I'm splendid. I'm so splendid today.
Splendid. Ben. I like that. You're like learning the Britishisms. That's a good one.
I'm feeling cheeky today, Ben.
Good, because today I think is a day for cheeky people. Actually, I'm very excited today. I've been planning this, thinking about it all day, and I think we've got a really great show ahead of us.
Hey, so it's Cheeky Day on Love and Reload, but before we get into it, let's go ahead and plug our sponsor, because we are doing this Africa Week to raise money for Mercy Joy Ministries and children in Uganda. So thanks today to our sponsor, Expat Partners. Expat Partners is a consulting group dedicated to providing top quality services and advice in the filling of immigration applications in France and globally. Filing of immigration applications in France and globally. We share, we care, we learn every day to provide the highest quality immigration services. Shout out to Fiona Mugino at Expat Partners. If you need to get in touch with her, she is the one. Thank you so much, Fiona. And we are going to raise at least $2,500 for children in Uganda for Mercy Joy Ministries. So if you want to donate and sponsor a child, I highly recommend it. I've done this personally. It is fantastic. Check out the website, mercyjoyministries.org, and our good friend, William and Allison Wiggins, who started this charity. Thanks so much. Ben Sookia, are you there? Did I lose you?
I am back. Hello.
My man. He's back.
Shall I tell you about today's show then?
Yes, tee it up for us.
All right, Ben. Here's the deal. We know each other well now. This is the third day. We're well into Africa Week. And I think we just need a bit of real talk.
Keep it real.
Yeah, keep it real. The truth about you and me, we are kindred spirits, because you and I, people know that you and I are tricksters, right?
Yes, we're cheeky people.
We are cheeky. And one thing that we both like to do is we like to take now and then the odd risk here or there, right? That's fair to say?
Yes, very fair. Love
people
risks.
Like us, people say that we're almost like, the bad boys of global mobility.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
And what we need in our lives to have some balance, right? What we need is to know the people that make the risks, and we need to know the people that navigate the risks.
Is this your way of telling me that when I go to jail, I don't call you for bail? I need to call somebody else?
I'm not going to pick up the phone this time.
Gosh. All right. So hopefully our next guest can be the person for me.
Absolutely. And the reason why we brought him on is he is a specialist in compliance. His name is Steven Powell, and he's the head of forensics for ENSafrica. So welcome to the show, Steven Powell.
Let's give him a round of applause. Hit that green button, that applause button there, lights. Hey, Steven, how's it going?
Great, Ben. Great to be here. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for being here, Sookia.
Steven, thanks very much for joining us tonight. We're really excited about this show because we really want to explore the real Africa and know really some great stories that you've got to bring. So maybe you could just start by introducing yourself, what it is that you do, and then we can maybe take it from there and find out some stories that you've got to tell from the experience that you've had over the years.
Certainly, Ben. I'm a former prosecutor, spent quite a number of years with the Department of Justice, and then I worked for one of the big audit firms in South Africa. And for the last 16 years, I've headed forensics at a large law firm in South Africa. And we sort out corruption risk. We help corporates and individuals to manage the corruption risks in Africa. So, and we also do a whole range of fraud investigation, when things go wrong. And just a cue to Ben, I'm the guy that, you get the quiz shows where you get to phone a friend. Yes. When you have drama, I'm the friend to a lot of corporates. It's terrible because sometimes, some of my best clients will give me a ring and they say to me, Steven, it's always great to see you, but you're the last person we really want to see. And, I only get the calls when there's real drama.
Oh, I love it. Fantastic.
Great.
Oh,
So,
hey, leave a comment. I want to just real quick before we get into it, Ben. I forgot to tell you. Hey, everybody, if you're watching this right now, we got a bunch of people joining us on LinkedIn right now. Leave a comment. Let me know who you are, where you are. Give yourself a shout out. And I want to hear a risk question. Steven's gonna have a lot of really cool topics. I want to hear your questions for Steven, and we will get to those. So hit like, leave a comment and a shout out. Go ahead, Ben.
great. Janet's already asking what kind of drama. So we're going to really delve into that. But in terms of fraud and corruption, what is it that you do on a kind of day-to-day basis? And are there any kind of standout stories or experiences that you would like to share with us about what you do in your day job?
Yeah, certainly. I'll get a call from a head of compliance in one of the corporates, and they'll have a concern that, in one of their subsidiaries, someone may have paid a bribe in order to get a government trading right or permit, or even just immigration visas when it comes to relocation. And, what happens is we have to go out, gather the facts, interview witnesses, get all the evidence. And some of it is really cool stuff because we've got a lot of tools and toys. So we're a bit like super sleuths, and we'll go and image computers, and we'll take the mailbox off the server, and we'll look at who's talking to who, what they're talking about. And the suspect won't even know that he or she has been looked at. So there's a lot of work we do behind the scenes. And then once we've put the case together, we actually go in and confront the suspects. And
hold on. I feel like this is happening to me right now, first of all. Okay. So tell me about these tips and tricks. And third, is this like what I see on television with like the night vision and like, usually it's like a cheating spouse, but for you, it's like an expat or something. I mean, first of all, tell me about the tips and tricks. I need more information about this. I love spy stuff. I need to know more.
Actually, before we go forward, Ben, it's very important. We need all the viewers to agree to an indemnity that they're not going to use any information that they gather from the show to commit fraud or corruption. So there's a theory. Okay. The American psychologists tell us that out of every 10 people, one of the 10 is a crook, one other person is totally ethical and honest, and the 80% in the middle can be moved by pressure or circumstance. So it is risky, and I have had situations, I lecture on fraud and corruption at one of the universities, and they called me in to come and investigate a procurement fraud. And I spoke to the head of procurement, and he said to me, "Sir, don't you remember me?" And I said, "No, remind me. I meet a lot of people in the work I do." And he said, "I was in your class at university." So he was clearly there to learn some of the tricks in order to commit the fraud. But it's not CSI. What we do is we do forensic analysis. So it's piecing together a whole lot of pieces of evidence to put the whole picture together. And it's a bit like building a jigsaw puzzle. And just the other day, I actually had to give evidence at a big commission of inquiry in South Africa. We call it the Zondo Commission because it's headed by our Deputy Judge President Raymond Zondo. And it's a commission of inquiry into state capture in South Africa. And, you'll be asking, what is state capture?
Yes, that's what I was going to ask. Yes, what is state capture?
It's something that took place. A family came across to South Africa about 12, 15 years ago from India with nothing but a suitcase. And this family determined that the easiest way to win business from government is to befriend and bribe the president of South Africa. Mm. And they managed to look after our president, and they won lucrative contracts. And before you blinked an eye, they had this multi-million computer industry business that they were running in South Africa. And they really got some lucrative contracts out of some of our major organizations, the power utility, the rail services. They got commissions as an intermediary on a whole lot of transactions. So, when you buy direct from whoever sells the product. If you want a locomotive from China, you go to a company in China that supplies the locomotive. And what they did is they inserted themselves as an intermediary, a man in the middle, and they made a commission of, I think the number was about 11% on every locomotive, and locomotives are not cheap.
So that sounds like a sales gig. Is that not illegal? I mean, to insert yourself in the middle, or is it the methods that they used to get the contracts.
Yeah, it's the methods. It's corruption.
Okay.
You know, they and all they were doing was inflating the cost of procurement and making a fat margin for themselves.
Wow, and I'm not allowed to use this now. I feel like you're really taking some things off the table for me, Steven, right now. Okay. Here,
this is the learning lesson for Ben. Ben.
So you're saying I can't do that? Okay. So real quick, we got some comments coming in. I want to honor these folks real quick here before Ben asks our next question. This is fascinating, Steven. Already, I love stuff like this. I watch this stuff on TV. It's like I binge watch this stuff. Mena, hello from Dubai. Hey, Mena, tell me about corruption in Dubai. Just throw that out there. Janet Turner, what kind of drama? We're going to get into that in depth. Cindy Salter from Dallas. What's up, Cindy? Christina from Houston. Hey, Christina. Is this exciting drama the reason you live in Africa, or are you born and raised? You want to just real quick answer that one, Steven?
Oh, yeah, sure. I live in Cape Town, South Africa, which is really one of the most beautiful places in the world. We've got Table Mountain and the most beautiful beaches and scenery and wildlife. It's just an awesome, awesome place to live.
And you're born and raised
yes,
South Africa?
Born and bred South Africa. Studied here, lived here all my life. And
awesome.
I travel quite a lot, Ben. So I've been to the States a couple of times and many, many parts of Africa. We've sorted out dramas in Nigeria, Zambia, Uganda, Ghana, Tanzania, you name it, I've been there. And I must tell you, the best thing is when you fly back to Cape Town and you just see the coast and the bay, and it's just so beautiful.
So you've been coming over here, and you're not investigating how Ben Sookia got the position of co-host this week on Love. Jason Rollins, hello, Steven. Hello, Ben's. Jason Rollins checking in from Express Corporate Housing. Wait, are we being looked at right now? This is a good question, actually. Okay, and this is a little like kind of more macro to your micro and what you do. But do we need to be concerned right now, Steven, about just the level of surveillance on the general populace? In your opinion?
I don't think so. You know, what we do, for example, is we're looking at particular suspects who've behaved badly. They've gotten up to mischief. We don't just go look at everybody. But having said that, I mean, what the American government gets up to is something else.
Okay, so basically, Jason, yes, we need to be concerned, is what he's saying. Yes, as American citizens, we need to be concerned. Valerie checking in from Houston. Cindy says that Steven's nailed me already, and he knows he's on to it. He's on me right now. Let's see here. Kunle says, I saw Steven testify at the commission. Quite interesting. Kunle from Nigeria.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that is awesome. So yeah, so let's get into it a little bit. I'm sorry, we got some more questions coming in, but we're going to get to those in a minute, Ben. I didn't want to derail you.
No worries at all. Steven, I think one of the great things about this show is that we can be honest and transparent and try and deal with real issues. And one of the things that people don't know about Africa, that maybe there is this traditional or old kind of perception that it's a region where there is a lot of corruption. That might be a perception that other people have.
Yeah.
The truth is that there is corruption and bribery and fraud in every country in the world, in every region. I know there is in the UK.
Exactly.
And also, you know, America and certainly Latin America. Bribery and corruption happens everywhere. It also does happen in Africa. That's obviously true.
Yeah. What
I'd like to know is, and what people might not know, is could you just tell us how sophisticated and kind of the amount of work that's put into making sure that has reduced in recent years, and what is being done to deal with the corruption that we all have to deal with? That would be great to know more about.
Absolutely. And I want to just agree with you, Ben. Corruption is a global problem. And where we find that corruption really proliferates and people and governments are exploited are in emerging markets. So Latin America, large parts of Asia, China, India, and Africa are more susceptible to corruption because you've got greater levels of poverty and less access to infrastructure. So what we find is a lot of the large corporates actually exploit the scenario, and they will bribe in order to win contracts and tenders. But over the last decade, there's been a massive clampdown on corruption in Africa, and governments across the board, and including our own, because South Africa has been through quite a turbulent last couple of years with our former president, who has recently been replaced by President Ramaphosa, he's come in on an anti-corruption ticket. And the same has happened in Nigeria with President Buhari. There's been a real clampdown on corruption, and they've been trying to bolster the capacity of the state to investigate and prosecute fraud and corruption to a far greater extent than has happened in the past. And so you've seen this whole tide turning against corruption and people mobilizing and doing their best to curb corruption. And at the same time, the US government has also played quite an integral role in fighting corruption, because the US government for years has been one of the most robust enforcers of corruption violations across the globe. And they've been very active on sorting out corruption in different parts of Africa. And what the US government is doing is they're imposing super penalties against companies that bribe. And the upshot of that is that a lot of companies are investing in anti-corruption programs and talking to lawyers like myself to help make sure that they've got policies, processes, procedures to ensure that their people don't get up to mischief. And so what I'm seeing is really positive. The environment has changed dramatically. In the past, you couldn't move through different border posts without being asked to pay a bribe. Now, people frown upon that type of behavior.
Why do we, besides the ethical and moral issues posed by corruption and graft, why do we care from an economical standpoint about corruption? Why is corruption such a problem? Why is it not looked at like just paying a fee like you would normally pay to any government agency for a permit or whatever? Yeah. Why is it not looked at as a cost of doing business? Why is it a much more insidious practice?
Because it actually escalates the cost of actually just living and doing business dramatically, and it's an unfair cost. And corruption really hurts the poorest of the poor, because you take in money that should be well spent on building houses, building schools, building infrastructure. And if you look at the example I gave earlier with state capture in South Africa, Eskom lost billions through the corruption that happened. What happened, for example, there was a coal mine that was bought by this family, and the family, this is all in the public domain. This family were known as the Gupta brothers. They bought a coal mine because they had connections at the power utility. They could sell coal at an inflated price and get the contracts. And the company that had been supplying coal to this particular part of Eskom, their contract was just summarily cancelled, and they had to lay off 500 people. That mine shut down. So we see the results of corruption graphically. It really hurts communities and hurts people, and it makes it unfair to do business. Because if you're trying to do business straight and compete just based on skills and competitiveness, and someone else is bribing, they get in all the contracts and they charge in a higher price. It's just so unfair.
Well, and I got to think that the best competitor doesn't win. It's the competitor that pays the most, bribe, right? So now you're left with these subpar services and contractors because they paid the most bribe, and they're truly not the most, the best and most innovative companies to work for. So like societally, it seems like there's also some sort of a deleterious impact to society when now you have the proliferation of all these subpar contractors, producing subpar contracts and everything. And anyway, I could see how it would cause a major issue. Now, one thing that this leads me to thinking about here in the United States, there always seems to be a call, for less government, less taxes, less bureaucracy, right? And what I find interesting is early on in what you were saying is anywhere that there is a lot of poverty, they are susceptible to corruption. And I got to think it's because the officials aren't making enough money and they're susceptible, right?
Exactly.
And then I wonder if in the United States, and I'm not saying we're the best, but you did mention that we've been at the tip of the spear on enforcement. So I'm wondering if we're not pretty good. Is it because our officials are paid maybe a living wage and therefore less susceptible to corruption? Is there something to that about paying the officials more money in order that they're not susceptible? Is there something there?
I think there's definitely something there. And in some of these areas, we've done investigations, and in terms of the FCPA, you're not allowed to provide anything of value to a government official. But if you operate in a retail organization in, let's use the DRC, for example, the policeman in the DRC will earn a fraction of what any law enforcement officer in the US would earn. And what happens is these guys moonlight as your security guards. And for corporates, they're not allowed to pay the security. They're not allowed to pay a government official. But how do they make sure that they get their product from the port to their stores? Because all along the way, there's all kinds of things happening. Your product is getting stolen. Your product arrives on a ship. The customs officials are creating problems with your paperwork because they want to extort a bribe from you. So they invent problems. And I did one that was actually quite a funny story in Ghana. One of our clients, a big multinational corporate in the liquor industry, was importing a lot of liquor products into Ghana, and the officials were blocking the containers at the port. And one of the security guards said to me, "Steve, there's an easy way to get the goods released, and what we do is the following." And what they were doing is buying a carton of frozen chicken. So every time the customs officials ran out of chicken, they would seize another container, invent a problem with the paperwork, and everyone knew this is how you release it. Now, it's not a high value, but for corporate, if you go and buy the chicken, you're taking part in a corrupt scheme, and potentially it's a FCPA violation, and the company can be prosecuted and pay millions of dollars in fines. So we had to put a stop to the frozen chicken. And then there's a whole lot of what we call facilitation payments. When you go through a border post, often an armed guard will ask you to pay $100 before they give you your passport back. That's corrupt. It's not allowed. And we call it a facilitation payment. And I must just share with you, Ben, on one of my trips to the Congo, I arrived at Kinshasa airport at about midnight, and I was carrying my health certificate with me. And for those of you, for all the audience, you need to know that your yellow fever inoculation only lasts for 10 years. And they looked at my health certificate, and they saw that I'd been inoculated 11 years previously. And suddenly everyone was screaming in French, "Invalide, expire," and I sort of gathered that these guys had latched on to the fact that my health certificate had expired. Next thing, I was hauled into a room with a health official, just him and I, and he said to me, he sat back and he said, "Monsieur, you've traveled a long way from South Africa to come to Kinshasa. It would be terribly inconvenient if I had to put you back on a plane and send you back to South Africa, wouldn't it?" So I said, "Yes, that would be pretty inconvenient." And he said, "Well then, Monsieur, I'm going to give you a few options. You can buy me a cup of coffee and we can forget about your health certificate." And I said to him, "Sir, with all due respect, I'm an anti-corruption lawyer. I can't buy you anything. That would be a bribe." And the official turns around to me and he says, Monsieur, you don't understand corruption. If one man buys another man a cup of coffee, how can this be corruption?" So I turned around, I said to him, "I don't have any local currency." And he said, "No problem, Monsieur, I accept South African Rand." And I took out my wallet and I got to 200 Rand. And he said, that's not a lot of money. I think 200 Rand is just over $10. And he said, "That's enough." And he took the 200 and he had a good laugh about it. But did I break the law? Actually, no, because there is an exception. They call it a health and safety situation. When you travel in any emerging market and you are solicited for payment and your safety is at risk, you don't have to accept a foreign needle in your arm, because often they will threaten to inoculate you if you want to stay, or you can pay a fine. You're allowed to pay the fine. As long as you notify everyone back at the office, send an email to compliance, make sure that it's reported, declared, that's a health and safety situation. And in some parts of Africa, the police actually stop you and they threaten to throw you in a prison cell. being in a prison cell with a bunch of criminals is also a health and safety situation. See,
I'm seeing that now. Now all the pieces are coming together, Steven. I appreciate these nuances very much. So your friends in Ghana with the containers being stopped for the chicken, if the Ghana people would have just pulled a gun on them, it would have been okay to give them the chicken. But because there was no guns involved, there was no chicken involved.
Exactly. You've learned so quickly, Ben. That's
part
of what the message we try get in compliance training. So there's got to be, it can't just be a financial threat. It's got to be a safety threat.
Well, that's interesting. We've got some comments coming here. I want to hear your questions, your comments for Steven. I find this stuff fascinating. I want to know if you do too. I know Ben's got a lot of questions for Steven. Let's see here. We've got a couple questions from the audience here. First, shout out to Vinny. What's up, Vinny from Nike? Shout out Portland. Jack Jampel from Philadelphia. What's up, Jack? Let's see here. Christina Blondheim shouting out Cape Town. Christina Blondheim loves talking about everywhere she's been. She's going to be on talking about Uganda soon. Viva Van Bakel, do love Africa. We do. You do. I do. Missing a subject there. Could use it. Let me know. Let's see here. Mena checking in said, Mena's got a question. So we got two questions from the audience, okay? Mena says, how are you applying compliance policies in the countries where the government offices are corrupted, especially with the pressure of business operation?
It's difficult. What we try and do is, if there is systemic corruption happening. So, for example, we spoke about the port in Ghana with the frozen chicken. What companies have to try and do is they shouldn't succumb to paying the bribe. What they need to do is go and organize a meeting with their lawyers, with the head of that particular unit, and warn them, this is what is happening on the ground. Please put a stop to this. We don't want to be in these situations. And that usually does have some impact. But what do you do when the commissioner of revenue is involved in it and getting a cut from the bribe? It becomes very, very difficult. And in some areas, sometimes corporates make the decision that this is not an area where we can operate. But that seldom happens. There are a number of regions where corporates have pulled out because they just can't operate without paying bribes. But in most cases, we are able to manage it, and we are able to negotiate with the enforcement authorities. And as I said earlier, most regimes across Africa have adopted a zero tolerance attitude to corruption. And President Buhari in Nigeria had a terrible reputation for corruption, but he's really invested in anti-corruption and come in on this anti-corruption ticket. So there is this political will to clean up the corruption.
Steven, sorry, just to jump in, I'm just wondering, how important is having a strong international network within the region of Africa, and how do you manage that? And also, is it just a network in Africa, or do you have your network in other regions as well, in other countries?
No, we focus. I mean, my continent is Africa, and that's the area that we look after. So we've got a network across the African continent, and our law firm has a footprint of offices in many of the regions. And then we have partners that we work with. And I travel. I've been to many of these countries myself. I really enjoy seeing some of the different regions in Africa. I remember, I must tell you a story of when I did some anti-corruption work with the Nigerian government. I flew to a part of Nigeria called Jos, and it's about a 3-hour drive from Lagos. And we drove at breakneck speed in a shuttle to get to Jos. And I actually phoned my office and I said to them, guys, I'm not getting back into that shuttle. I've got to get back to Lagos. But every now and then, the roads had massive potholes in it, and you'd see vehicles overturned with wheels still spinning that had just had an accident. And this was really scary. But coupled to that, Boko Haram were dropping bombs. You could actually hear the sound of bombs going off from where we were. And so I didn't feel terribly safe at the time. And I phoned my office and I said to them, guys, you've got to get me on a flight from Jos to Lagos. I'm not going on this drive again. And they managed to get me on a flight. but I almost came into danger of missing the flight because the work I was doing was running over, and I had a 4 o'clock flight. So what the guy said to me is, we'll send the driver with your passport and he'll get your boarding pass. And if you've got a boarding pass, the pilot will wait. This sounded pretty bizarre that an airplane would wait for one person, but we gave the passport and driver went off. And then when I managed to get out of the work I was doing in Jos, when we finished, I told another driver, you've got to get me to the airport quickly. And because of Boko Haram, there were roadblocks. So we stop at a roadblock, policeman circles the car, and usually what happens when they circle the car a few times, they're looking to find a fault with the vehicle and they're going to ask for a little payment in order to make the fault go away. So it's a bribe solicitation scenario. And the guy comes to the window of the car and he says to me, sir, can I see your travel documents? But my passport is with the other driver that went to get my boarding pass. So I gave him my South African driver's license, and he looked at this and he said to me, what is your business in South Africa? And I said to him, sir, I'm an anti-corruption lawyer and I'm helping the Nigerian government fight corruption.
I bet that goes over real well every time you say it too. Like, has that ever?
It was brilliant. He actually, he gave me my driver's license back and he said, sir, in that case, we won't waste any of your time. You may go on. And I got to the airport. I got there just after 4 o'clock and the plane was waiting on the tarmac for me to go on board. And then as I got into my seat, the rest of the plane started clapping because obviously they were a little irritated at waiting for this one passenger. So sometimes it pays to be an anti-corruption lawyer.
Wow. That's amazing. I bet you got a million of those stories. That's fantastic. Cindy Salter. Hey, Cindy, it's good to see you. Cindy says, how often should employees or suppliers need to refresh background checks, or is there another method we should consider?
Yeah. In South Africa, there's been a major drive to do, we call it lifestyle audits, which is just an enhanced background check on government officials to make sure that they're not living lifestyles that are not commensurate to the income that they earn, because a lot of government officials succumb to the temptation of taking bribes. And so we've introduced legislation and helping government to conduct these lifestyle audits, but it is a proactive measure that companies need to adopt, and the background checks are a useful mechanism to detect fraud and corruption. So I suggest that you do this at least once a year and you repeat the process, because it is a great measure to prevent corruption. So I think that's a great question, Cindy, and a lot of corporates do that, particularly in Africa.
Yeah, interesting. Ben, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I think your stories are fascinating, Stephen. I kind of want to just hear more. But has there ever been an experience where you've already mentioned a couple where you've feared, for your life or your personal safety? I don't know if there's a number one or other than ones you've mentioned that you'd like to tell us about.
Definitely. What happens is we often do assignments where, the stakes are high, where the amounts involved are astronomical, and it runs into billions of rands, which is millions of US dollars, hundreds of millions of US dollars. And then it does get risky. And, I did one investigation in Zambia where we investigated the chairman of one of the large banks, and he was suspected of corruption, money laundering, forgery and uttering, and a whole range of offenses. And I remember whenever I went into Lusaka, I got a government work permit, and I would have my own driver, VIP protection, bodyguard, and we would go in these black Jeeps, and he would have an AK-47 on the seat next to him. But I must tell you, you feel like a bit of a target when you're in this armored vehicle and you've got the driver with a weapon. I actually felt safer when I went in nondescript and just jumped into an Uber or a taxi and went into town, and nobody really knew I was there. But you do investigations like that, and it does become scary. In that particular case, we actually managed to crack the case because they don't have sophisticated data analysis tools, and they don't have the software and the skills to image computers. So what happened is our suspect was merely using his computer, typing all the instructions to move money to Switzerland, etc. And what the Zambian government did is they brought in the experts from South Africa. My team and I came in, and we went in after hours to ensure that we didn't create a run on the bank, if there's this major investigation. And we worked right through the night, and we imaged 28 computers, including the suspect's computer. And then we analyzed everything, and we managed to find instructions to a Swiss bank in Geneva. And the suspect had denied any complicity in any of that, but he never for 1 second imagined that the Zambian government would have the capacity to actually go and do the imaging of his computer and then do the data analytics to actually find all this evidence. So we caught him totally by surprise.
Wow.
So we do have those scenarios.
That's fantastic. I feel like this is like global, like the stuff you work on is like global news kind of stuff. And I know you can't really necessarily name all the people, because especially some of these ongoing things. But I want to also kind of, first I want to thank our sponsor before we get to the second half, because I'm going to bring this back to global mobility, and I want to tie this into relocation and global mobility and what corporations need to know. It's okay, you can throw stuff on the show. We're a cheeky show. Let's go ahead and thank our sponsor real quick here, Expat Partners. Shout out to Expat Partners, our sponsor for today. Expat Partners is a consulting group dedicated to providing top quality services and advice in the filing of immigration applications in France and globally. We share, we care, and we learn every day to provide the highest quality immigration services. Shout out to Fiona Mugino, friend of the show, and also our sponsor today. If you want more information, check out Fiona. And don't forget to donate to Mercy Joy Ministries. The link is at the bottom, mercyjoyministries.org, run by William Wiggins and his wife, Allison Wiggins, our friends in relocation and Uganda. Thanks so much. So getting back really quick, I wanted to try to draw this in because, Steven, we've got people watching this show who manage relocation programs at corporations, global mobility programs, where they're sending people all over the place. We've got relocation management companies, who manage programs for corporations, right? We've got immigration professionals. We got just your basic movers, right? But help us understand, what do we need to know or be thinking about or contemplating in terms of corruption and fraud when we are considering global mobility policies for corporations?
I think the one fraud that is rampant across the globe at the moment is diverted payment fraud. So when we paying for services, often what happens is invoices are intercepted, our Gmail accounts are hacked, and the fraudsters are creating invoices that look identical to the original invoice. But all they're changing is the bank account, and the money goes off to a fraudulent account. So be very vigilant about where you pay to, and make sure that you don't accept a change of bank account. And it's happening. And the one story I want to share, which I think hits at the relocation space, is that we actually had a South African who worked in the US for a number of years. She spent about 15 years in the US, came back to South Africa. And what happened is the fraudsters used some farming software. So they sent her an email and they told her that it's critically important that you update your security. We've had an attack by cyber fraudsters. Please click on the following link. And what she did is she clicked on that, and then it said, please update your passwords. She put in her old passwords, put in a new password, and this was all being monitored. It was a bogus site run by the fraudsters. And the next step that the fraudsters undertook is they impersonated, it's a case of identity theft. They impersonated this lady, and they went and grabbed her pension. They even paid 30% taxes to redeem the pension early. And it's really scary because this was, you work all your life, you're hoping to retire, and suddenly your retirement savings are gone. So, you've got to make sure that it sounds simple, but avoid the phishing emails, the scams. You can't win lotteries that you've never entered. don't respond to anything that's telling you to plug in your password. The banks are not going to send you that. The pension funds certainly won't. So be vigilant around that. And then in the relocation industry, there are touch points, when we deal with immigration in emerging markets in Africa, there's often consultants who will offer to get things done very, very quickly. So the time period that it would typically take to get a visa or an immigration permit might be 6 months, but then you'll have a brilliant consultant who will do it in 2 weeks for you, but for an exorbitant fee. And that's corruption. You've got to, if things are happening faster than is normal and there's a big fee attached, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand there's a corruption risk in that.
Ben, do you see that, Ben Sookia, in your immigration?
Yeah, no, I have seen issues where things can get sped up, or also things take a lot longer. I remember years ago working with Kenyan immigration, and there were just a bunch of work permit applications that were waiting to be processed, but the person processing them apparently was away, and they were just locked in a room, for several weeks. Whereas, there are other instances where they would just get processed, like that. And you do need to you need to work with your council and your providers in those regions. But it is an issue from my perspective. When we onboard our immigration providers, we need to have service agreements in place, specifically to deal with bribery issues. But again, it's not just for Africa. This is for whether it's a provider or a council in the US or Latin America or Asia.
But that's tricky, right, Ben? Because this is tricky, and if you're watching this right now, I see a bunch of people checking in. Shout out to Janaina checking in, Victoria, Valerie, Charles. I want to hear from you all. What types of corruption and fraud do you see that may or may not impact the relocation process in your country? I want to hear from you. Throw it in the comments here, and we'll riff on it a little bit. But Ben, as a supplier, though, right? We're constantly under pressure to provide something faster, right? Faster. Our clients are always wanting faster. And so it puts us in a situation. And then, of course, then the country may or may not have their hand out, right? And they, and so, that's a sticky wicket.
It is. It really is. I've had instances. My job is to try and get the work permit expedited or approved quicker.
I feel like you're the bag man. I feel like you're the guy.
Bag man. He's the guy with the cash. I think we need to do a lifestyle audit on Ben Sookia. That Ferrari you're driving, Ben.
Yes. See, I was the obvious choice as the fraudster here, but it's actually the one you least suspect. It's Ben, actually.
It's true. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. When I gave evidence at the commission, the one individual's nickname was the bag man. And he used to carry a sports bag around with him, and the whistleblowers told us that bag was full of cash, and he'd be going to pay the bribes. So I think there is, Ben has touched on it, but you've got to make sure that you use credible service providers. And if what they're doing is too good to be true, it is too good to be true, and there's probably a bribe in it. And so you've also got to make sure you have the right anti-corruption clauses in your contracts with them. And you've got to make sure you tell them that when you do work for company X, you may not bribe. Because what happens is Big Brother in the US with the FCPA is going to come after your company, and they're going to hold you accountable for the acts of your agents and intermediaries unless you've done all the necessary, like having the clauses, telling them they can't bribe, etc.
Yeah. I would just flip it, though. I've also had experiences where I've worked with people in the US, and everything's perfectly legitimate, but the difference between bribery and someone knowing someone at the consulate that has a good relationship, that isn't bribery, it's just having a good relationship with someone that might be able to get something approved quicker. That's a really fine line.
Well, how is that good relationship formed, right? I mean, good relationships don't grow on trees. They're from shared experiences, shared meals, shared wine, shared bank accounts. I mean, there's a slippery slope there. You know what I mean? So let's play a game. Okay, I'm feeling cheeky. Let's play a game called Is It Fraud? Okay, is it corruption? We're gonna play a game called Is It Corruption? Okay, because my mind is going in a million directions right now. So let's use Ben's example here. I got a few, right? Let's play a game. And also, if you're playing at home, feel free to leave in the comments there a scenario that you'd like Steven to weigh in on. Okay. So Ben Sookia, I mean, some hypothetical gentleman in the UK called Ben, who carries a bag around and gets things done.
Nice hair.
And that wonderful hair.
And he's a really good, nice guy. People like him. They help him because they like him.
Yes, because they like him. That's right. He has a relationship. So so is it fraud? So if Ben submits a immigration document to the consulate and there is a 50 quid paperclip to the back of that, is that fraud or corruption? Is that corruption?
No question.
Okay, very good. We're just establishing the baselines, okay?
Yeah.
You know, the math gets harder here, okay? I promise, okay? All right, so now if he hands it to his favorite person at the consulate, who they enjoy golf on the weekends and their wives are best friends, and every Christmas he sends a case of wine to the house, is that corruption?
Yeah, it's getting slightly more gray, but it's still corruption. You're still abusing the friendship, and you're still providing something of value to that official if you give him the $50.
You're taking the 50. You're taking the 50 away. The friendship is cultivated based on the golf outings, which Ben picks up more than he doesn't, and is also a case of wine at the holidays and dinner with the wives once a year. Is that corruption, or is that just a nice relationship?
It's getting tricky. It's not as clear cut, but if they are following the rules and they're not giving Ben any preference or undue advantage, and they're not breaking the laws, then I think it's not going to amount to corruption. But it is getting gray.
Well, when he goes in there, he says, "Hey, Jack, top of the stack." You know what I mean? And Jack says, "Right on. Cheerio," and he does it. That now that's preferential treatment, isn't it? But there wasn't an exchange in the moment, but it was based on a relationship and the fact that he loves Ben's haircut and the dinners and the golf.
Yeah. Well, the dinners could be seen as an inducement, so you've also got to be modest in the entertainment with those friends and make sure that you're not doing things that could be perceived as a bribe. So for example, a lot of US companies that operate on our continent have a $50 limit on the spend, for these dinners.
$50 limit. Okay.
Well, Ben, what about you though? What? Because in my industry, we take clients out for dinner. You've received gifts and stuff like that. It's a really grey area, actually. Hold on, because Steven made me agree to something at the beginning of this that I wouldn't use his tips and tricks. Steven, do I also have indemnification here? Okay, is what I say going to be used against me in a global court of law? Is Interpol going to come down? This is a serious question, okay? Because I want to be open and I want to be candid, okay? I want to pull back the curtain, okay? But and I'm not going to say anything that anybody hasn't said before, but can I get in trouble for talking about these hypothetical situations?
No, it's fine.
Okay, very good.
You can always start and preface, say, I have a friend who once had this situation.
I had a friend who once had the situation where, they take clients out to dinners. I have a friend who, when they go and they meet with clients, it's customary to meet in the office, discuss an opportunity or a project or services, or maybe it's a quarterly performance review or an annual performance review. And then afterwards to then have dinner, perhaps drinks, mild debauchery, etc. Is any of that or all of that corruption?
Yeah. There are different rules that come into play.
What?
When you look at the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of the United States, what it focuses on is bribes to foreign government officials. So if we go back to the scenario where Ben has the relationship and he takes people out to dinner, etc., if that friend is a government official, Ben's compliance officer in his own company is going to be saying, Ben, it's not a good idea for you to be spending any money on that official. When you deal with someone in the private sector, that doesn't have the ability to make a government decision in your favor, you can go a bit further in terms of the relationship because they're not a government decision maker.
Let's talk in terms of private commercial, and let's assume we're not bribing government officials. Instead, we're bribing private corporate. I mean, my friend is bribing private corporate people. So in the case of my friend and the private corporate person, is the dinner and drinks after the business meeting, if it's a client, is that corruption? I mean, it's kind of standard practice here. I don't know.
No, it's anti-corruption isn't the end of marketing. It's not the end of the business lunches or dinners, but there are limits. So, we had a situation where a group of 5 officials who played key roles in procurement decisions at one of the state-owned companies in South Africa had a dinner in London, and the value of the dinner was at one of the top restaurants in Soho. It was the equivalent of 65,000. It was, I think the number was around 6,000 pounds. Now that is over the top. Do you follow? Because you go too far. So with many organizations, they put a limit on how much you're allowed to spend so that you can't get into that corruption perception scenario.
Interesting. So do you know what that dollar amount is in the United States if my friend wants to be compliant?
Well, the figure for many of the US corporates that operate on my continent is $50.
Just for government or also for other corporate clients?
No, there are some corporates who have a $25 limit for government officials and a $50 for corporate. But most organizations just say, you've got to make sure it's modest. Make sure you don't go over the top.
Modest. Yeah. Who's going out for a modest dinner these days? I mean,
I'm
not like, go see my wife and kids or go out with you for a modest dinner. Let's see here. We got some great comments coming in here. Jen says this is a tense game. I know, right? Futures hanging the balance, Jen. I know. This is really interesting. Anka says it would be circumstantial evidence in case of a larger legal case. So friendship, unless there is a pattern.
Yeah, I think that's right as well. Yeah. Thanks, Sookia.
Cindy has a great story. Cindy's playing My Story's Cooler Than Your Game. I once had a supplier send iPads to every one of my supply chain management. They said it was so we could check out their new website. By the way, it was Christmas. I returned them all and fired the supplier. The supplier was shocked. Right. They lost a multi-million-dollar contract. True story.
Go, Cindy. I've actually investigated exactly this. The new iPad came out. The supplier sent 50 iPads to our client and said, we just want you folks to try these out and see if you like them. And they never ever collected them back. So a lot of my clients send these types of gifts back and they do cancel contracts with suppliers. So Cindy, I think you've done exactly what a model corporate would do in those scenarios. And that is too extravagant. But it doesn't stop there. I did anti-corruption training with the OECD. We went on a tour of Nigeria and we trained legal professionals on some of the anti-corruption rules. And one of the lawyers in the room said to me, Steve, I do a ton of work for government. At the end of the year, come Christmas time, they send me a catalog, a Rolex catalog, and they mark the ones that they want us to buy.
A Rolex catalog?
Yeah. Wow. And she said to me, are you saying that I can't buy a Rolex watch for my client, even though they give me tons of work? And I said to her, lady, you're a lawyer just like me. You don't need me to tell you it's wrong. And she said to me, Mr. Powell, are you going to feed my family if I don't get work? And that's a lawyer. That's scary.
I have a question for both of you, actually. It's just come to my mind, but in the UK, certainly since I've worked in Globe Mobility, when you join a new firm, this is actually a training that all employees have to do. It's a painful one because it can take hours to read all the guidance and then you have to take the test and all that. Just wondering, is that the case in South Africa and the US? Or?
It's applied across the board globally,
Okay.
and we do work for US corporates all the time and their operations locally. So induction, anti-corruption training, it is one of the ways in which you manage corruption risks wherever you operate.
Okay.
So it is critically important. And then companies have to reinforce it. In South Africa, we've just introduced some guidelines, and the guidelines have introduced, they call it tone from the top. So leadership have to demonstrate that they set.
What's going on? I'm here.
Not me.
You moving furniture over there, bud?
I don't think so.
No, these Christmas lights they do in the disco thing.
Can you still hear something? Or?
No, we're good. We're good.
No.
No, but Ben, I mean, listen, I work for a moving company. I don't know what you think my onboarding is like, but we're not going over like intensive corruption training, okay? Hypothetically for a friend. No, I mean, corruption for us is when we sign a document saying we're not gonna do corruption.
Okay.
Yeah, keep it moving. I mean, we don't really, but this is really good. I've got a few more scenarios though for Steven though, because I think this game is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's bring it over to kind of my world, right? So if we send a container to a country and it's at the port, Ghana, let's say, wherever, and it's getting held up, is it corruption if they're requiring some sort of a facilitation payment to move that in country? Is that corruption if we pay that?
Yeah. And a lot of the times the clearing agent or the logistics company will pay that solicitation payment or facilitation payment. And we actually had one for a large corporate, and they had picked up on the invoice, there was a line item for $10,000, and it said smoothing fee. So they gave it to me and said, what do we do? So I said, well, ask them, what is the smoothing fee? If you pay it, you could potentially be funding a bribe that they've already paid. You could be reimbursing the bribe. So we asked the logistics company, what is the smoothing fee? And they said, well, the MD was very upset. Last time a vessel came and delivered containers, the vessel was held up in the port. It wasn't allowed to disembark. And every day there's a $15,000 demurrage fee that gets charged for the vessel standing there. And it stood there for 10 days. So there was $150,000 in demurrage costs, which is an extra cost to providing whatever goods or services you get into that destination. And they said, your CEO said to us, make sure that doesn't happen again. So what we did is we paid a smoothing fee to the customs officials to make sure they didn't block the vessel from disembarking. And for them, it was just logical. That's what it took. That's what we did. We saved you guys a lot of money. But for corporate, if they allow this, and it happens a number of times, it's a breach of FCPA. And what are the fines for companies that breach FCPA? The US government imposes penalties. The latest penalties against Airbus was $3 billion. That was a joint enforcement with the French government, the British government, and the US. And Petrobras, we've all heard about the scandal in Brazil. There, the fines, the settlements were around $1.7 billion. So this is big money for large corporates if they bribe. So a lot of corporates have invested in compliance programs, and people like one of our audience who was giving some of the examples of what they did with the iPads. They take a very robust view.
I've got a few more of these, and we got, but I want to get to Kunle here from the audience here, who's also going to be on our show Friday. So tune in because he's a fantastic professional. He said there are some African countries that have a cultural clash with corruption. Giving gifts is customary during a religious celebration. How do you balance the clash?
It's a tough one to balance, and the line from compliance is that corruption laws trump customary laws or customary behaviors. So, for example, in South Africa, if you wanted a meeting with one of the tribal kings, the done thing was to provide 5 Nguni cows. And so our client said, we can't provide cows, we can't transport cows. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy 5 Mont Blanc pens to the value of these cows, and we'll provide that as a gift And they said to compliance, "Can we do this?" And compliance said, "Absolutely not. You can't do it." So
But
we've
would
got
the cows have been any different? Were the cows acceptable?
no, it's the value is there, and for a tribal leader, he is regarded by the US government as a government official. So you will be bribing a government official, and FCPA will be applicable. So you can't go there.
Okay, so sorry, Kunle. I mean, if you have to know, I mean, basically all the answers are no, but we're going to keep asking questions. So
No.
I've got another one for you. Okay,
Actually, I must correct you. No, a lot of the corporates come to me as the lawyer, and they say, "Steve, instead of just saying no to everything, can you find a way that we can do what we want to do legitimately?"
And then you say no again.
No, sometimes there are ways to do things that won't breach, but still arrive at, as long as it's not a corrupt intention or objective.
Okay.
Sorry, I
Okay. So
interrupted you.
no. Well, it's totally cool. All right. So here's another common practice in relocation. Okay, my friends tell me, a lot of friends tell me this. So in our business, we are one of many service providers for these large relocation management companies. Okay. And these large relocation management companies measure the satisfaction of the customer or the assignee, the expat, if you will, the assignee, right? And they use those scores to then decide who they're going to give more business to. Okay. So it is, but the assignee has to decide to fill out the survey, right? Because let's face it, most people don't fill out satisfaction surveys these days, right? And so offers of like, hey, fill out the survey, get a gift card. Is that an acceptable practice, or is that corruption?
Yeah, gift cards are actually very tough for compliance, because gift cards we regard them as cash equivalents. So it's the same as giving cash. And the rules for anti-corruption compliance is you actually have to avoid giving cash. So that's just another way of actually bribing.
So let's switch it around and say, what would you tell a client if they asked you, how could they do that in a way that's compliant?
They can have a competition and draw out of a hat.
Okay, so you're entered to win. So 100 people are entered to win 100 gift cards, and just fill out the survey. Okay, interesting. So that actually is a segue to another question I have, and I'm sorry, Ben, but these questions have plagued me for years. So we go to Worldwide ERC, and we are exhibiting
But just hold on. Let me tell you, as a lawyer, I need to get all of the facts 100% and then give you a considered opinion. And
that sounds expensive, Steven.
Exactly. No, exactly. That's where I make money.
You charge by the hour.
Exactly. So in fact, my rate is rand. So the rand is something like, I think it's 18 rand to $1. So the currency is really low. So I'm a super cheap resource to the foreign companies at the moment.
Nice.
But apart from that, these are headaches that compliance people in organizations are grappling with. So usually what happens is, when a marketing team wants to go and do something like the gift cards, they have to talk to compliance, and we've got to look at the ins and outs and the different local laws that may come into operation, and we've got to tread very, very carefully. At the moment, society is unforgiving of corporates who pay bribes. So you'll find that most companies have got a very low risk tolerance, and they're very conservative, and they avoid anything that could remotely taint their reputation as being a corrupt company, because that's also really damaging to business.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to ask another scenario, if that's all right. And this scenario is, we go to a trade show, we go to a conference, we have a booth, we exhibit, right?
Yeah.
And we're passing out our literature, whatever. And to get people to drop their business card into our little fishbowl, right? Enter to win an iPad.
Yeah.
Is that corruption?
No, that's marketing. That's not corruption.
What if a government official wins that iPad? Is that corruption?
it's not corruption if the government official wins it and there's a draw, and it's not, you haven't rigged it to make sure he gets it, and it's not a concealed way of influencing that government official. Let me tell you when it does cross the line, Ben.
Thank you.
And that is when you have, and a lot of companies do this. I think US companies are terrible in this, because what they do is they will have their summit every year, and they'll invite people from all over the globe to come and spend 2 weeks in the States. 3 days is at the conference, where there's some education. The rest is holidays, tours. And when you invite a government official plus his family, you're crossing the line. So one of the big Australian mining companies paid a $25 million fine. They sponsored the Beijing Olympics, and they invited a whole lot of their customers in Africa and other parts of the globe to come and attend the Olympics, but they built in a free holiday for the family, and that was seen as a way of bribing the officials who ordered their goods to procure more from them. So you've got to be very careful, and that's why I say that, you know, companies talk to their compliance teams all the time to make sure they don't cross the boundaries and get into trouble.
So now, if that same company were to go into that fishbowl, sort through all the cards, find their best prospect, and call them and say, "Hey, congratulations, you won an iPad."
Yep.
That is corruption.
Oh, you're getting naughty and it's getting gray.
I mean, this stuff like legitimately happens. People do this all the time. People are actually shocked when I tell them that I draw at random. They're like, "What do you mean? You know, I'm not even going to enter because you're just going to pick a client." I'm like, "No, I'm like going to stick my hand in this thing and pick somebody."
Yeah,
and like legitimately, people don't believe me. That's how common it is.
But you know, with corruption, you've got to have the intent to commit an act of corruption. There's got to be this evil intent behind it as well.
So you can't accidentally be corrupt. It has to nefarious intent.
Exactly.
Got a question for you, Ben. Actually, speaking broadly again or hypothetically, you're asking these questions for Steven in South Africa, but just in the moving space or in the US or people that operate in your circles, is there someone in your company or in where you are geographically that is around to answer these questions for the American market?
You mean like a chief compliance officer for a moving company?
I don't know. I suppose that's my question.
No, we haven't onboarded that one yet. Chief compliance. I mean, most companies that we see in this space. Now, there's exceptions, but there's a lot of small companies that don't have resources. You know, and we run into this problem whenever we try to do the right thing, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it's privacy and IT. Whether it is compliance and corruption, we don't oftentimes have access to the caliber of professionals needed to put the right programs in place and provide those kinds of education, training, protections that we need. It takes a highly skilled person like Steven to really kind of do this kind of stuff. And I'll be honest, a lot of suppliers also don't make it a priority, right? It costs money. I mean,
exactly.
But I think this idea that the rand, you know, is a good angle there. I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you're touching on what is a big problem for SMMEs. You know, they just don't have the access to funds to get the lawyers on board to do everything, and they can't afford to have a dedicated compliance person. So there are companies, there are organizations. There's a US organization in the States called Trace International, and they offer these types of services without levying these fees of the big law firms, you know, to make it accessible. And there's big projects in Africa. I'm working with the African Development Bank to bring anti-corruption compliance more accessible to the SMME market, you know, and to provide online websites and facilities for them to draw the policies and the materials so that they too can become anti-corruption compliant. And then at the same time, there's a big drive to force the corporates who partner with these smaller SMMEs to educate those small businesses and share their policies and processes, so that almost sharing the knowledge, sharing the skills with those who don't have access to the legal expertise.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I could see Steven speaking at some of these large RMC summits as well. We've got a few folks here that made some comments here. I want to honor those people, and then I'm gonna say, because we're kind of over our time here. But yeah, I know this has been a lot of fun. And we're gonna close with a final word, but let's honor these folks real quick. Vinny Valverde at Nike. Now, Vinny, that's a big company, Nike. At my previous company at Trimble,
yes,
we had to report every single gift that we'd received from suppliers. Or maybe that's great. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of companies have those declarations. It's very good.
Yeah. Renee says, I want to thank a client for the work and took them a really good bottle of wine. It was rejected. So where is the line between gratitude and bribery, Steven?
Yeah. So you've got to make sure your bottle of wine is less than $50. Don't go over the top.
Yeah, $50 is a high mark though in some countries, right? I mean, is it $50 exactly around the world? Because I mean, okay.
Different corporates have different limits, and a lot of government departments have got very low limits as well. So you've got to make sure what works in your local region and what works with what does the local laws say in terms of gifts. Do they put a threshold? And the term where there is no threshold is be modest. Make sure it's not an expensive bottle of wine.
And if you got some money that you need to throw at somebody and you can't give it to a client, go ahead and donate it to Mercy Joy Ministries and sponsor a child in Uganda and send them to vocational school. Okay, for the cost of a nice bottle of wine, you can do that at mercyjoyministries.org. Steven, you're going to say
exactly, and that's not corruption. If they donate to charity, that's brilliant.
If I say to a client, listen, I appreciate your business so much, I want to donate $1,000 to the charity of your choice. Is that acceptable? Because I tied it to something.
Yeah,
it was
if
a thing.
Tied to something. Yeah.
Oh man, gee whiz. Okay, Heidi Lou. There's definitely a gray area with gifts, and I know some companies say gift limits of $100, more or less. Interesting. Heidi goes on to say thoughts on paying customers to remove bad reviews on certain sites. I hear it's happening in all industries, not just moving. Yes, paying. Yeah. Yes. What do you think about that?
Ben, I actually investigated journalists who were paid to review motor vehicles, and they would fly to Japan and Germany on luxury flights, stay in upmarket accommodation, and come back with the most amazing reviews for those vehicles. That's corruption.
Steven, do you ever feel like you're taking all the fun out of business? Because these trips sound fabulous, and I want to go on one, but I feel like by the time I get to that level, you're going to just tell everybody that they can't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's my favorite coffee is a cappuccino at Seattle Coffees. They're all over the globe. And I hate it when they scream out, that you want a decaf, and they say a no fun cappuccino.
And no fun. There you go. We're running over time here. This has been great. There's been so many great comments, but I want to leave you both with a final thought here. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think this has been absolutely fascinating stuff. And one of the issues that I have encountered over my time specializing in immigration is the debate between lawyers and non-lawyers in immigration. It's a really interesting one, and it's a whole separate conversation. But actually what I've learned today is it's not about lawyers versus non-lawyers or legal issues and non-legal issues in immigration. This is a global mobility issue. Today we're talking about Africa. But it's fascinating to know that both Ben and myself have been learning about something that's so important and so relevant, not just in Africa, but in every region in the world. And what's made me feel really good is that we're learning from Steven, and we're learning about how sophisticated the measures and the technology and the initiatives that are taking place in Africa. And actually, maybe we can learn and improve in Europe, in the UK, and in North America from some of the measures that you've talked about. I think it's a really grey area as well. And I think maybe moving companies, immigration companies need to learn more about this. But I think it's very ambiguous. And I think probably we need more education in our industry about what is acceptable and what we're not able to do. Because I think, Ben, neither you nor I really know, and we've learned quite a lot today. So I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So
I know we're going to jail, Ben. That's what I know.
I think you're probably right on that. So we are, yeah.
We'll be better, Steven. We'll be better, Steven. I promise.
No,
Steven,
absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Steven, what's you want to leave us with a final thought?
Yeah. My message is, this fraud and corruption risk can be managed. It's not easy, and sometimes we've got to walk a hard line, but I always find that the longer route, the harder route is the most gratifying route. And doing things the right way with the right ethics is so important. So it can be managed. Thanks, guys.
It's a great message, Steven. And thank you, everybody that chimed in today. We had some great questions, some great comments. This was a lot of fun. This is a fun, interesting topic. I love this stuff. Ben, who do we got tomorrow?
So tomorrow we have Tamlin and Robin. Then they're going to be talking about safety and security in Africa. So again, we're going to be dealing with some interesting issues, and they're going to tell us about, again, the challenges, but actually what's taking place to make sure Africa is a safe region and a secure region for the global mobility industry.
And Tamlin manages global mobility for Maersk, doesn't she?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and Robin represents Quadrant in Africa. So we're good to have a corporate and also Robin advising on what's taking place on his side as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Tune in tomorrow at same time, Ben?
Same time tomorrow, yeah, same time, 3 p.m. US time. 3
p.m. Eastern, GMT -5. Is that proper? I don't even know.
That's right.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for being involved. Hit that like button if you haven't. Send a little heart out to Steven. Maybe he'll lighten up. I don't know. Anyway, thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
take care.
Thank
and
you.
Thanks for being able to see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you.